Tov, today's daf yomi is Sotah daf Membei, Sotah 42. Today's daf yomi, the Gemara begins on 42a. We're going to start 6 lines from the top. Gemara is discussing the danger of the sin of chanufa, of flattery. You're not allowed to flatter somebody by saying that they're good when they're not good, that they're righteous when they're not. So the Gemara tells us, Amar Rebbe Lazar, Kol Eda Sheyesh Bachanufa, any congregation which has flattery, Mu'usa, Kanida, is going to be rejected from God like a Nida, as it states, Ki Adas Chanef Gamod, as it states in the Pasuk in Job, that the Adas, the congregation of flatteries, is Galmod, is going to be Galmud, is going to be rejected. What does this mean? Kiadas Chanef Galmud. Shekem Bekar Chayayam Korin Lenida Galmuda, that in the Krachim of the sea and the overseas people, they call a Nida a Galmuda, meaning it's separated. What does that mean? My Galmuda, Gamua Mibawa. She is separated from her husband. And so therefore, a congregation that is a chanef, that's flattering, is going to be separated from God. Amar Rebbe Lazar, Kol Eda Sheish Bachanufa. Rebbe Lazar also taught any congregation that has flattery was sof gola, in the end will be exiled. How do we know that? Because it says, Ksiv hacha ki adas chanef gamud, v'ksiv hasam, and it states over there in Isaiah, v'amarta b'vavcha, and you say in your hearts, you say in your hearts, who gave birth to me, and I am bereft, and I am gamuda, which we already said is associated with chanef, and I am goa visura, I'm exiled. Namar Amirmia Baraba, Arba Kisos, Emakabelos, Pineshli. Now there are 4 types of groups that will never get to have a union with God, to see the face of God. Katleitzim, those who are mockers, those who just are cynical. Or they just waste their time and always just throw shade on people. Kas chanifim, this is the category of flatterers. Kas shikarim, this is the category of liars. Vikat mesaper lashon hara, and those who speak bad things. Katleitzim, how do we know that the category of scoffers or mockers will not see the face of God? Because it says, Mashach yado es lo tzitzim. It says in the verse, he withdrew his hand from those who were mocking. That's from Hosea. Kas chanifim, how do we know that the chanifim? Because it says, Kilo afanav chanef yavo. Because the flatterer will not come in front of him, in front of God. Kas shikarim, category of liars, will not see God, because it states, Dover shikarim lo yichon v'neged einai. The speaker of lies will not be firm in front of my eyes. Kat mesaper lashon hara, because it says, Kilo el chafetz rasha, ata lo yagurcha ra. Tzadik ata Hashem lo yagur b'megurcha ra. And so this is a reference to lashon hara, because if you look at the context of that verse, Rashi says the context of that verse is reference to lashon hara. So therefore, for that reason, we're going to say that the whole verse is referring to lashon hara. And so Rashi writes, Lo yagurim chara v'gavim misaper lashon hara. Rashi says it's written with respect to those who gossip. Because he's not saying in his words the right things. So Hajan Alach Elon Amaran, we've completed this chapter called Elon Amaran, and now we go into this next chapter, the 8th chapter, which is called the chapter of Mashuach Nochama. So the chapter says, the Mishnah begins when there is a Kohen who's anointed not to be the Kohen Gadol, not to be the Skan, but he's anointed to be the deputy he's anointed to be the one who's in charge of speaking to the people before they go out to battle and telling them, making sure that they're appropriate to go out to battle and telling them not to be afraid if they do go out to battle. So this is based upon the fact that it says Vanigash HaKohen, that the Kohen will come close and speak to the people. It says in Devarim chapter 20, today you're going into battle on your enemies. Don't be afraid before them. So the Mishnah tells us, when this Kohen speaks to the people, he speaks in Hebrew. As it states, when it comes close to battle, and then the Kohen, when you come to battle, the Kohen will come close and he'll speak to the people. Nigash HaKohen, that refers to the Kohen and Mashiach Muhammad, that refers to the Kohen is anointed for battle. And so when it says he speaks, it means B'lashon HaKodesh, it means in Hebrew. The Gemara is going to say, how do we know that Diber means Hebrew? But first, the Mishnah continues, it says to them, Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, you're going to battle on your enemies. And the Mishnah says, and the Mashiach Muhammad says, you're not going against your brothers. You're not going to fight. Judah's not fighting Shimon, and Shimon is not fighting Benjamin. That if they fall into your hands, they will have mercy. That if you fall into your brother's hands, their brother will have mercy. Like it states in Divrei Hayamim, and they grabbed a hold of the captives, and all their naked ones, they dressed them up from the booty, they clothed them. They put shoes on them, they fed them, they gave them to drink, anointed them, they put everybody who couldn't walk on their donkeys. And they brought them back to Jericho, that were next to their brothers, and then they went back to Shomron. We see from here, even though there was a war, they clothed their brothers, who they were fighting against. Against your enemies are going. But you, if you're fighting against your enemies, if you fall into their hands, they won't have mercy. Let your hearts not be soft. Don't be afraid, don't be frightened. What does this mean? Don't be afraid. When it comes to the horses neighing, and the glittering of the swords. Don't be afraid, frightened. The banging of the shields, the shofas hakalagsin, and don't be afraid. We said of the glittering of the swords and the shofas hakalagsin. So this is a reference to. Hold on one second. This is a reference to the many soldiers. So this word kalagsin in the Meiri has a different gear. So he says aklagsin. So it's an unusual word in the Talmud, and that's why there's a discussion about what it is. And the implication from Rashi is that it refers to the soldiers. But the Rambam says this was a stick that they used to smack the people with. And that's how they would defeat them in battle. Al tachbazu, don't be frightened, mikol koronos, from the sound of their horns blasting. Al taratzu, mikol tzavachos, don't be frightened from their shouts and their cries. Ki Hashem Elokechem halech imachem, because Hashem, your God, who walks with you. Hein ba'im b'nitzchon shabas radam. These enemies, they come at you with their coming with their warriors of flesh and blood. And you are coming with your you're coming with the power of God. The Philistines came with the power of Goliath. Maya Sotah, what happened to Goliath in the end? Sotah Lasuf. Lasof nafal b'cherev. In the end, Goliath fell by the sword. V'naflo imo. And also with him fell his people, the Philistines. B'nei Ammon, the Ammonites came, Baal ben Shal Shovach. They thought that Shovach, their general, their king, would defeat you. Maya Sofo. Remember the Shovach in the end, Sof Nafal B'Cherev, he fell by the sword. And his people fell with him. Atem came, but you're not like that. God is going to go with you in battle. What does that refer to? Is that Machane Aaron? This refers to the ark that will go and fight for the Jewish people. So the Gemara says, how do we know that this Kohen spoke in Hebrew? It's because that you have to say it in Hebrew, because it says V'diber. So how does that prove it? My Kamar, how does that prove it needs to be in Hebrew? Ache Kamar, Shenemar, it says later on in the verse, hold on one second. It says in the verse, V'diber, that the Kohen speak to the people, U'alan U'omer, and also by Moshe, at the Ten Commandments, it says, Moshe Yidaber, Me'okim Yanenu B'kol. So Ma'alan, just like at the Ten Commandments, Moshe spoke in Hebrew, but Lashon HaKodesh, Avkam Lashon HaKodesh, also here was in Hebrew. So the Kohen came close and he spoke to the people. Yachol kol Kohen sheyir. So I might think any Kohen can do this. It doesn't have to be someone who's anointed for battle. It says in the next verse that the officers spoke to the people. So we see Ma'ashotrim b'mamuna, just like the officers were anointed. Kohen b'mamuna. This Kohen also needed to be anointed. Ve'ema Kohen Gadol, maybe the high priest. Maybe we're talking about here that the one who was anointed is the high priest and he's the one who spoke to the people. The Gemara says, no, dumya deshoter. It's similar to an officer. Ma'ashoter sheyesh mimuna al gabav. Just like the officer is somebody who's on top of him. Rashi says that's the judge. Av kohen sheyesh mimuna al gabav. So too, it must be a kohen who's appointed who has somebody on top of him. And that's the Mashuach Muhammad is not the number one. He has the Kohen Gadol on top of him also. So the Gemara asks the question, well, Kohen Gadol Nami, even the high priest is somebody on top of him. So the king is above the high priest. So why don't we say that the high priest is the one who was giving this warning? So the Gemara explains, Davodaso Kamar. No, referring to somebody who's on top of him in service of God. There's only the Kohen Gadol's on top of the Mashiach Muhammad. Maskan. What about the deputy Kohen Gadol? That also is a Kohen who has somebody on top of him, and he's Memuna. He's appointed to be the deputy Kohen Gadol. The Gemara says he's not really appointed. Skan Lav Memuna. He's not really appointed for work. He's just a backup. He's just a spare. Tanya Amar Rabbi Chanina Skan Kohanim Lema. What do we need? Lema Skan Memuna. For what is this? The deputy Kohen Gadol appointed. Shem Irabo Psul Kohen Gadol. That if a disqualification happens to the high priest, he'll take his place and he'll come in place of him. So then what does he do when he gets up there? He says, Shema Yisrael, listen Israel. Ma'ishna Shema Yisrael. Why does it say Shema Yisrael? God says to the Jewish people, even if you only held, even if the only merit you have is that you recite Shema in the morning and the afternoon, you will not be handed over into their hands. You will not be handed over into their hands. Just have to recite the Shema in the morning and the evening, and you will be safe from these enemies. The Mashiach Muhammad spoke to the soldiers twice. One's at the border and one's in the battle. What does he say at the border? He says, Shimu Dvarai, 42b. Listen to my words, Marachayam Melchama. Listen to my words, those who go into battle. Listen to the words of the Kohen who's arranging the battle, and he's saying who's able to go. V'chizru, and those who are appropriate to go back should go back. The Mochama Ma'omer, that was on the border, but in the battle, what does he say? He says in the battle, don't be afraid. Al teruv, al tachbazu, al tartu. These are words for fear, but they're 4 words. So why do we need 4 words? These correspond to the four things that the idolaters do. Magifin, they bang their they bang their shields. Marian, they shout out with trumpets. Tzavachim, they scream. The Romsin, and they cause their horses to neigh. Plishtim, Belvin, and Chanosh Goliath. The Philistines came with Goliath. Goliath. So let's talk about the name Goliath. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Sha'amad B'Gilui Panim. That he was Goliath comes from the fact that he stood with Gilui Panim with Chutzpah Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because what did Goliath say? He said, "Bruacham Ish v'Yered Elai." Choose for me a man and come down to me. But the word Ish was really a reference to God. Ve'in Ish al Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's a reference to God. Shenemar Hashem Ish Milchama. God is a man of war. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Areni Mapilo Ayad Ben Ish. So God says, I want to kill Goliath by someone who's not even a man. He's a Ben Ish. He's still a baby. He's a lad. As it states for David, Ben Ish Ephrati. David was called a Ben Ish. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shemer Meir B'Shloshim Mekomos L'Kadu Piv V'Oso Rasha. In three places, Goliath doomed himself using his doomed himself with his own words. He said, "Bruacham Ish v'Yered Elai." He says, "Choose for me a man and come down to me." So from the fact he says the Yered Elai, which implies upon me, meaning to say that let this man defeat me. He didn't realize what he was saying. V'idach, he says also, whether this man will come down against me and strike me, and indeed that's what happened. V'idach to Kamer David, Goliath said to David, "Hakelav anochi ki ata ba elai b'maklos." Am I a dog? Ki ata ba elai b'maklos. You're coming upon me with sticks, and in the end, that's exactly how David defeated him. So the Gemara says, "Well, David Nami." About David also, he said, you're coming at me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. Yeah, but David then changed it. But David then said, I'm coming at you with God, and God will just defeat all that. And the Philistine came close, in the morning and the evening. Why did he do it in the morning and the evening? He wanted to cause the Jewish people, their esteem out there, to miss out on the mitzvah of Shema in the morning and in the afternoon. Meaning to say that when they see Goliath standing there, they won't be able to have kavanah properly. Because we saw earlier, the Maharsha says, that as long as they have the schus of Kriya Shema, they'll be able to defeat him. So therefore, he wanted to knock out this merit of Kriya Shema. And he said, "Save Arba'im Yom." Goliath stood there for 40 days. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Keneged Arba'im Yom Shenasna Ben Torah. This guy responds to the 40 days in which the Torah was given. And a man, an Isha Beinayim. Well, this Beinayim is a strange word. Came out from the camps of the Philistines. My Beinayim. What does Beinayim mean? Amarab Shemavuna Mekom Mum. He is clear of any defect, physical defect. Shmuel says, Beinoni Sheba Achav. He's the middle one amongst his brothers. Debei Rabbi Shua Amar Shu Asra Kabinyan. He's built like a building. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Barmea Papi Vechada Neni. He's the son of 100 Barmea Papi Vechada Nani, meaning to say that there were 100 men and one father who tried to be with him. Rashi says, Benat Teruvos, he's the son of a mixture. There were many men who slept with his mother that night. And so she became conceived from one of them. Nimta Echad Aviv. One of them was his father, and the rest of them were adulterers. Nani is a lashon of father in Persian, Rashi says. And Papi, Rashi says, Parshtara, the lashon ish, and it's an expression of a man. Habeinayim, what does it mean? Sheyatzami bein anashim harbe. That's how Rashi understands it. But Tosfos says, cites the Rishalmi, which says that a woman could become pregnant from multiple men. The fetus can come from multiple men. That's not how we understand the science. But if they would take that approach, then you would say that that Goliath came from the mixture of many different men. I guess today it'd be possible in the laboratory to do it. So the rabbis are anticipating everything. So the Gemara then continues, the Goliath Shmo was his name was Goliath. The Goliath Shmo Migat. His name is Goliath from Gat. So Tani Rav Yosef Shakol Dash and Asimo Kagat. So because everybody pressed his mother like a wine press. Ksiv, it says here that the Isha Benayim was going up, and Goliath the Philistine, his name was Goliath. Where did he come from? From Ma'aros Plishtim. So he came up from the place called Ma'aros Plishtim, where the caves of the Philistines. But we read it, that's the way it's written, but we read it by the tradition as Ma'arachos, from the plains of the Philistines. Tani Rav Yosef, why does it say Ma'aros? It's from a sexual word of intercourse. Everybody had intercourse with his mother. Ksiv, it says also, amongst the war of the Philistines, V'yishbi benov asher bilidei harafa. So it says in that verse, this is, hold on, let me read the whole pasuk here. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Okay, but V'yishbi benov asher bilidei harafa mishkal kino shlosh meos mishkal mechoshes u'chagor chadasha v'yomer v'hakos es David. So Yishbi benov, who was from the offspring of Arapah, so the Gemara is going to say, that this Arapah is actually a reference to Ruth. And so the Gemara is going to say that this Yishbi benov, who is another name for Goliath, is really a descendant of Ruth. And so that's what we're talking about. So the Gemara explains, Rabbi Shmuel Charamar Harafa Shema. Her real name was Harafa. V'lamanekra Shema Arpa. Why was she called Arpa? Shakol Arfanos Amechra. Everybody was assaulting her from the behind. V'charamar Arpa Shema. V'lamanekra Shema Harafa. Why was she called Harafa? Shakol Dashinosa. Because everybody was thrashing her. Karifus, like you crush wheat. V'cheinu Omer Vatikach Aisha. Alternatively, mehacha, that where does the name come from Harafa to Arpa? If you are crushing a fool with a mortar, amongst the crushed kernels, then you're not going to remove the foolishness. Even if you crush the fool, you won't remove this. As Arbas Ela Yoldu Arfa Begat, these four were born to Aharpa Begat, Vayipu Biad David Biad Avadav, and they fell into the hands of David and his servants. My Ninu, what are these? Who are these four? Amrav Chista, Saf, Madon, Goliath, and Yishbi Benov. So the four are Saf, Madon, Goliath, and Yishbi Benov. And all of these were killed by descendants of Ruth. So Arpa gave birth to them, and they were all killed by descendants of Ruth. And they fell into the hands of David and his servants. How do we know that? Because it says, Vatishak Arpa chamosa verut dav kaba. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Yavo b'nei neshuka v'yipu b'yad b'nei devuka. Let the offspring of the neshuka, i.e., the one who just kissed, that was Arpa, fall into the hands of the one who cleaved, that is Ruth. Meaning to say, Arpa, she kissed Naomi, but then she left. She wasn't really committed. David, his ancestor, which was Ruth, she cleaved. She was devuka. So that Rabbi Norman Lamb, blessed memory, said, we need to be a faith of devuka, not of neshuka. Some people want to just do a superficial kiss. That's not enough. You need to be devuka. We need to be devuka. We need to be fully connected, fully committed. Darash Rava, B'schar Arba, Mos, Sharida Arpa Chamosa, Zachtu V'yatzu Mimenu Arba Giborim. Because Arpa gave 4 tears for her mother-in-law before she left her, she merited to have 4 children, 4 warriors. Saf Madon Goliath and Yishbi Beru. Shenemar Batisena Kola Batifkena Od. Then the Gemara says about Goliath, the pasuk says, Chetz Chanito, the spear, the tip of his spear was like a weaver's tip. Vikarina, and we read it, Eitz Chanito. What does that mean? Amar Rabbi Elazar, the verse is ending. That was all the praise of Goliath. We still haven't reached half of his praise. Because you're not allowed to praise, you're not supposed to praise the wicked. So the Gemara says, well, so why even say anything? The Gemara explains, because we want to say how great David was and how great the miracle was. So we have to say a little bit, but not too much. The Ammon came they thought that they would have the strength of Shovach. Shovach, he was the general of Hadad Ezer, Uksif Shofech. But it's written Shovach, but and it's also written one time in Shmuel Beis it's called Shovach, but in Divrei Yamim it's called Shofach. So what do we do? Rabbi Shmuel Chadam or Shofach Shmuel, but Lama Nekra Shmuel. So once his real name was Shofach, so why was it called Shovach? Because he was tall like a dovecote that holds the doves. One says his name was Shovach. Why was it called Shofach? So whoever sees him, with their blood would flow out of their body like water. So the Gemara says another verse where Rav and Shmuel debate about the prophets. It says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring upon the Jewish people a very strong nation. Ashpaso kever pasuach. Its ashpa is an open grave. Kulam giborim. What does that mean? Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Asi, Chanamar, Bishash, Zorkin Chetz, when they shoot their arrows, Osin ashpasos shachalam. They make piles and piles of dead humans. B'shema tomar she'umanim bekar. Maybe you think that the reason why they did it is because they're so good in battle. Tamalomar kulam giborim. No, because they're all strong. And when they go to the bathroom, they make piles and piles of feces. Maybe you'll say, because their stomach is hurting. No, it's because they're so strong. So they eat a lot, and so therefore they make a lot of feces. We see from here, a person who has a lot of waste, it's because he's sick. Why do we need to know this fact? Whether or not we need to call the doctor. So it says in the verse, if a person has concern in his heart, Yashchana, he should be Yashchana. What does that mean? Rabbi Amar Masi Chanamar Yashchana Midaito. He should remove it from his mind. Don't think about it. Chanamar Yisi Chana. He should talk about it to other people. Okay, so this is today's beautiful daf, and we'll stop over here. If anybody has any questions, happy to address.